The last time Diane looked at me, it was the day she threw my suitcase onto her porch and told me I'd never be good enough for her son. 3 years later, I was the one standing over her husband's hospital bed, holding his life in my hands. And when she recognized me under those fluorescent lights, I watched her face drain of every ounce of the cruelty she once wore so proudly. My name is Rachel. And for 6 years, I tried to make a broken marriage feel like a home. I married young at 23, full of hope, believing love could survive anything, even a mother-in-law who never once said my name without a sting behind it. Diane wasn't just difficult. She was the kind of woman who smiled in family photos and then whispered poison the moment the camera was gone. "You're lucky he chose you," she'd say. "Girls like you don't usually land men like my son." I swallowed those words for years, telling myself that love meant patience. That time would soften her. It never did. The cruelty escalated when Daniel and I struggled to have children. To miscarriages in 18 months. I remember lying in a hospital bed after the second one, empty and hollow, and Diane walking in not with flowers, not with comfort, but with a question that still echoes in my chest. Are you even capable of giving this family what it needs? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared at the ceiling and let the tears fall sideways into my ears, silent and burning. Daniel never defended me. Not once. He'd go quiet whenever his mother spoke, as if disagreeing with her was a crime punishable by exile. I used to think his silence was weakness. Later, I understood it was loyalty, just not to me. The end came on an ordinary Tuesday. I'd taken a part-time job at a local clinic to save a little money of my own, something Diane mocked openly. A nurse's assistant, she'd scoff. Is that really the dream you had for yourself? I never argued. I just kept showing up, kept learning, kept quietly building something that was mine. 3 months later, Daniel told me he wanted a divorce. Not because he'd stopped loving me, he said, but because things would be easier if I stepped aside. Easier for who? I never asked. I already knew the answer. Diane made sure the separation was as humiliating as possible. She packed my belongings into 2 suitcases before I even had a chance to process what was happening, set them on the porch, and said the words that would replay in my mind for years. You were never going to be enough for this family. Some women just aren't built for it. I stood on that porch in the rain, 29 years old, with nothing but 2 suitcases and a marriage that had quietly erased me. I remember thinking, if I disappear right now, would anyone even notice? But something in me refused to shrink. I moved 2 states away, into a small apartment above a laundromat, and enrolled in an accelerated nursing program. I worked night shifts at a diner to pay for textbooks. I studied until my eyes burned, fueled by something Diane never expected me to have: quiet, unshakable determination. I wasn't trying to prove her wrong. I was trying to find myself again, piece by piece, in a life that finally belonged to me. 2 years passed. I became a registered nurse, then pursued my certification as a trauma specialist. I threw myself into the work not to escape my past, but because, for the first time, I felt useful, valued, seen. My colleagues respected me. Patients trusted me. I built a life stitched together by my own hands, thread by thread, until the fabric was strong enough to hold me. I never spoke to Daniel again. I heard through mutual friends that the marriage he chose over me hadn't magically fixed whatever was broken in him. But I didn't feel triumph hearing that. I felt something quite a relief that I was no longer tangled in it. Then, on a Thursday evening shift, everything collided. The trauma bay doors burst open. A multi-vehicle accident on the interstate. Paramedics wheeled in a man in his early 60s, blood soaked through his shirt, vitals crashing. I moved into action, immediately checking airway, calling for imaging, stabilizing what I could. Before the surgeon arrived, it wasn't. Until I glanced at the intake chart that my hands went still for half a second. Robert Whitman, Diane's husband. I didn't have time to process the shock. In trauma medicine, hesitation costs lives, and I refused to let personal history compromise my professionalism. I called for blood products, coordinated with the surgical team, and worked with a focus so sharp it drowned out everything except the rhythm of his heartbeat on the monitor. 20 minutes later, the doors swung open again. And there she was, Diane, older, thinner. Her hands trembling as she clutched her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes swept across the room in panic until they landed on me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The woman who once told me I wasn't built for her family was now standing in front of me, powerless, desperate, needing something only I could help provide. Rachel. She whispered, disbelief flooding her voice. Mrs. Whitman. I said calmly, my tone steady, professional. Your husband is stable for now. We're moving him to surgery. She stared at me like she was trying to reconcile the woman she remembered with the one standing in scrubs, giving orders, saving her husband's life. You ... You're a nurse here, she asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Trauma nurse specialist. I corrected gently. I'll be assisting the surgical team tonight. Something shifted in her expression, shame, maybe, or the sudden collapse of every assumption she'd built her cruelty on. The woman who once dismissed my worth was now trusting me, whether she wanted to or not, with the life of the man she loved. I could have let bitterness take over in that moment. I could have made her wait, made her feel the same helplessness she once made me feel. But that's not who I'd become. I'd spent 2 years learning that healing myself meant refusing to become the person who hurt me. So I did my job. I did it well. I stayed by Robert's side through surgery prep, monitored his vitals, and made sure Diane received every update with compassion, not spite. Hours later, when Robert was stable and resting, Diane found me in the hallway. Her hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't from panic, it was from something closer to humility. I said terrible things to you, she said quietly. I judged you before I ever really knew you. And tonight, you saved my husband's life without hesitation, even after everything. I looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, not with the need for an apology to fix years of pain, just with the calm clarity of someone who had already healed long before this moment arrived. I didn't do it for you, I said honestly. I did it because it's who I am. Who I've always been. Actually, you just never gave me the chance to show you. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Rachel. I'm so sorry, I nodded, accepting the apology not because I needed it, but because closure matters for both people, not just one. I walked out of that hospital that night into the cool evening air, and for the first time in years, I felt something settle completely inside me. Not vengeance. Not triumph, peace. I realized that the greatest revenge isn't humiliation, it's transformation. It's becoming so whole, so strong, so undeniably capable, that the people who once tried to diminish you are left standing in awe of the person you built out of their rejection. Diane never controlled my worth. She only delayed my understanding of it. If you're rebuilding your life after someone made you feel small, remember this. Your value was never up for someone else's approval. Every setback, every heartbreak, every cruel word, they're not the end of your story. They're the beginning of your becoming. Grow anyway. Heal anyway. Rise anyway. And one day, when life brings you full circle, you won't need revenge. You'll simply need to show up as exactly who you were always meant to be. If this story touched something in you, make sure you're subscribed because more powerful stories of strength, healing, and quiet justice are on the way. Stories that remind you your comeback is always greater than their cruelty.